Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Following the Call series. It's living the Sermon on the Mount together, and I think the together part is important.
Very important.
We are on chapter 3 now, which is entitled Foolish Wisdom. And I think the best way to kick this chapter and this conversation off with you guys is by reading the part of the Sermon on the Mount that we'll be discussing. So, blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven, for that is how their ancestors treated the prophets. And then this chapter goes on to parse out what is meant in those verses, and includes 3 different authors. The first one is a college professor, and she's talking about how she had her students read the Sermon on the Mount for a literature class and was expecting, the kind of what you expect to hear.
More of a pious response.
Right, like kind of the way I took it, like her expectations were, you're just going to tell me what you think I want to hear. And she was located in Texas, so considered it somewhat part of the Bible Belt of America. But our students instead expressed shock and outrage at how outdated some of these commands were and how they just couldn't apply them to themselves. And then she was alarmed by that, but then even more alarming for her was some of our students who kind of weren't that provoked by the Sermon on the Mount and just said, it's just an antiquated historical text that is comical and certainly can't apply today. So that was more alarming to her. And then the next section goes on to talk about the commands that are given and
the kind of people Jesus picked.
Right.
To be his disciples.
That was kind of the summary of that. Then the last one talks about John Deere talks about the anti-Beatitudes and how, you take the Beatitudes and they seem like hard commands, but then you turn it around and say the exact opposite and how that can kind of tell you why the Beatitudes are so essential to living a life that God commands or God desires.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what you took out of the chapter. I'd be interested.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good collection and thought-provoking of insights here. I think what was interesting from the first selection from the English professor, Virginia Stem Owens, is how on reflection she was actually grateful for the students who were offended by the Beatitudes. Because I think, coming from a cultural Christian context, it's easy to just read them and sort of think of them as good Sunday school lessons, or as she puts it, as one of the students put it, which she actually found the most disturbing, as a guideline for good manners.
Right.
So, the golden rule, something you learn in Sunday school and you're pleased with yourself. But actually, the students who found it offensive possibly realized more what Jesus was calling them to, because the Beatitudes go so much against human sensibility. And I also found John Deere's little exercise here in the back listing the anti-Beatitudes to be a really valuable one. And even though, maybe some of them didn't resonate with me, I actually made a little list of my own.
Oh, I'd love to hear that.
Anti-Beatitudes, which I think are maybe more current. So, blessed are the influencers. Blessed are the effective. Blessed are the well-spoken. Blessed are the successful. Blessed are the spiritual. I think in a Christian context, that's often like a very misleading. We look for spiritual influencers, Christian influencers. We look for the well-spoken pastor, who can command the room and inspire people. There's always an argument for that. We're spreading the gospel, right? We're being effective. We're bringing the message of Jesus to a huge audience. Is that how Jesus lived? I mean, one could ask, wouldn't Jesus have been more effective if he'd stayed alive for 30 more years? You know, wouldn't his ministry have gone farther to more people if he'd cooperated with the religious authorities of his time instead of insulting them and telling them, you know, what he told them? So
Yeah.
I think reflecting on the Beatitudes and the life of Jesus, who embodied what he preached, actually is a pretty strong rebuke to the way many of us, you know, and I include myself at times, think about how we should live and what we place value on.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And for me, even just hearing you say that it is somewhat provoking, and it is important to grapple with. But then I was just thinking, like, reflecting on this chapter in particular, and something that Virginia Stem Owens also discusses in her section of the chapter. Why the reason that I react, and maybe other people can relate to this, is like, wow, you know, where is it just, it does it align with the Bible to be able to just have fun, enjoy life, you know, not have to be so heavy and serious all the time, and to really live by these guidelines just somehow seems a bit depressing sometimes.
Warning.
Yeah, and not being successful and sort of just like being down on yourself. But in reflecting on it more, to me, what kind of encouraged me was like maybe just to have trust in the way Jesus leads our lives too. Like, it's kind of a paradox, but these things, you know, embracing whatever's going on and trying to embrace the commands of Jesus fully and innocently, like not having an ulterior motive, that often isn't far away from having joy and a good time and, you know, laughter and all the things that we associate with positivity and light. So for me, maybe it's just letting go and having some trust in that, and not worrying too much about how I'm going to heavily tread after, you know, the commands of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think you know, the things we are programmed, or, you know, that are just part of our human makeup to strive after, you know, influence, the esteem of others.
That's true.
These are all things that by which those who are good at them and are successful kind of approach the divine themselves. They are on an upward path, right? And what Jesus does is he flips that around, because he is God and he comes down and becomes man in the most humble way possible. And, you know, there's something to be said for, you know, working hard and trying to do well in the world. But then the real freedom, I think, comes when we realize that God did become a poor person, a very poor person. And if we are to follow him, we have to follow him in that way, down the mountain, not up the mountain.
Yeah. And that also lines up with the middle passage in this book, because I thought it was an interesting take to think about Jesus's audience. At the time of the Sermon on the Mount, they were struggling. They were probably just horrible things were happening in a lot of the onlookers' lives at the time. And that must have been such a huge encouragement for Jesus to give that sermon in that context. And I often wonder, like, we're kind of sitting here centuries later, but how does it apply now? That's always the constant. And like, it does, and it's crazy how that just transcends history. Yeah.
Well, it definitely applies in our everyday life here in community. Who do we choose to associate with? You know, are we aware of our own shortcomings, and do we mourn over them? Not in a depressing way, but in a way that we realize we're in need of help. That gives also meaning to our prayer life. That we're not satisfied and think we have something in ourselves. What are the other ones? You know, being willing to be the odd ones, being willing to be the ones who people look at and say, how stupid. that's not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not fun.
But yeah, these are daily things that we can try to recall to our minds, and make them real in our lives.
Rich, I was just looking at the study guide at the back, and I have to ask you. There's this question here.
Oh no!
Have you ever found yourself trying to be a spiritual hero?
Wow. I don't think I have.
Yeah.
I may have.
I doubt it.
I may have at one point. I'm trying to think in what context I would have been a spiritual hero.
No, I can't see
Yeah,
it.
sorry. But if any of you have been or have striven to be a spiritual hero, please let us know in the comments, and any other reflections you have on this chapter. Thanks for watching.